What's good, folks? Family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, and people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguise Coverage, the only podcast in existence that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin, and that is presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York, and that is One Pie Pizza. Find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or any one of the podcasting apps or platforms that you are choosing to listen to this show on. I'm your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro 2_ANT. In tonight's episode of Disguise Coverage, got a fun one. Well, I guess it depends on what you define as fun, but I think it's a fun one, and I hope you folks find it as a fun one, or find this episode as a fun one. So this episode is titled "What to Expect from the 2023 Buffalo Bills Defense and Why." We're going to dive into the Buffalo Bills defense, as I still think it's a hot button topic. The defense as a whole, the defense being taken over by Sean McDermott, the departure of Leslie Frazier. But the conversation I want to have around this Bills defense is there's certain pieces I've talked about this offseason on this show. There's certain pieces myself and Eric have talked about in the film room when it comes to what this Bills defense was missing in spurts last year, in spurts throughout previous seasons, and what tweaks we would like to see them use or employ or deploy upcoming in the 2023 season. And so we're going to talk about some of that tonight and kind of wrap it all up in a nice package and neat little bow. But I also want to put it into the perspective or within the scope of league trends defensively in terms of what we are seeing from top defenses, top defensive coordinators, because there's always, and this is something I speak to a lot in the show, just that idea of how the pendulum swings in the NFL. And what we've seen recently is defenses have started to take that pendulum and swing it back in their favor. And like it always happens in the NFL, it's a give and take, but the offenses will swing that pendulum back in their favor. Defenses will counter and swing, and just round and round we go. And to kind of put it into like a broader term example, you've got defenses starting to play more too high and light boxes and lighter defensive interiors because they're trying to one gap and penetrate and get to the quarterback, and you trying to stop zone runs. And so it's just a matter of time before offenses get a little heavier on the inside and use more gap runs and try to physically move around and dominate on those lighter defensive tackles and use more passing concepts that attack too high or start to run the ball more to force defenses to bring a safety down. And it's just, those are small examples of it, but it's just the nature of the give and take of the eternal battle that is NFL offenses versus NFL defenses. And so the conversation in tonight's episode is going to center around who the Buffalo Bills have been defensively these past several years under Leslie Frazier, with kind of the hand of Sean McDermott being involved in what they could be in 2023 under Sean McDermott, and then putting that into based on the quote unquote failures we've seen them have in the playoffs these past years. So that's kind of the direction of the show tonight. And it's a conversation that I think is a good tone setter and table setter, as we're now 2 weeks away from training camp. 2 weeks from tomorrow, training camp will be live. And once training camp starts, feels like it goes by so fast. And then you're in the preseason, and then the preseason speeds by and you're in the regular season. So another table setting piece to kind of get your minds right, get your minds focused on things schematically and from an X's and O standpoint and philosophical standpoint, a high level, conversation piece on who and what the Buffalo Bills defense has been, could be, needs to be, so on and so forth, all of those pieces. Appreciate the folks coming in. Zach is here. Well, Zach says, let's get jiggy with it. And he says it with all caps. I wonder how much of a Will Smith fan Zach is. And I wonder if you know all the words to Let's Get Jiggy With It. And I think I know part of the first verse, and I'm kind of embarrassed of that. RJ says, what's up? What's up? Nikki saying, yeah, the whole crew's here. Yeah, you're seeing a lot of people trickle in. You're seeing the comments. Jason saying, it's been a long time since the Bills defense has been the question going into the season. I think that's an interesting point. I guess I've never even thought of it to that degree. Like, if you're looking at both sides of the ball, I guess the Bills defense would be the bigger question, not necessarily from like who's going to be better or worse, but I think there are more questions around the Bills defense. You even just starting from a roster standpoint, what are you going to get from Von Miller? What do you get from the new additions? What does the linebacker position look like? What does Micah Hyde look like coming back from injury? What does Tre'Davious White look like another year removed from that ACL tear? And then all of that funneling into the idea of Sean McDermott returning to the defensive coordinator position after not really seeing full-time DC duties since he left Carolina and came to Buffalo. So that's a fair point. Yeah, usually there's been a really big, for me, I still think the biggest question on this entire team exists on the offensive side of the ball. But I think if you're looking at everything from, a holistic defense versus offense perspective, yeah, I think the defense probably has more questions or is a bigger question, depending on how you want to phrase it. Ooh, very fair. Ooh, Nikki says, time for McDermott to set the next trend is what you're saying. I actually like that comment. It ties into one of my first points about Sean McDermott and what this Bills defense has been. So I like where your head's at already. As we do here, I like to, start to get things matriculating down and grabbing comments and opening thoughts from the live chat. So if you are rolling in now, where you're in now, question, thoughts, comments, concerns, ideologies, philosophies, maxims, theorems, whatever you got, throw them up into the live chat and do that throughout the entire episode. I try to bring up as many comments and thoughts and everything as I possibly can. Super chats always get priority because I see the color. Well, one, I respect the monetary donation. Two, I see the color and it pulls me away from my notes. But Andrew says, wondering what your minimal expectations are for Boogie and Epinesa this year. I'll start with Epinesa because I think I'm higher on Epinesa than probably a lot of people. I think minimally, Epinesa is a strong edge 4. I think he showed improvement last year in a lot of ways that he's not getting credit for. I know he gets knocked a lot for the missed tackles and the poor run defense, but he got better in that area as the season went on. But I think he showed better technicality in his pass rush, better hand technique, better placement, better plan, better movement, better transitions than I think really he's been getting credit for. So I think I'm higher on Epinesa than most. So I think in an ideal world, he's your edge 4, quote unquote. Vaughn comes back and is good to go. And you've got Vaughn, you've got Groot, you've got Leonard Floyd, and then you've got AJ Epinesa. That's my minimal expectation for Epinesa. For Boogie, minimal expectation is edge 5. Maybe even less. Like I was lower on Boogie when he came out from Wake Forest. I didn't love the pick. And I wanted to be proven wrong. And at this point, I feel like I haven't, given what we've seen from him from an output and production standpoint. But I don't really put concrete judgment on any player before year 3. So I do think Epinesa is further along, and not just because he has another year in the league than Boogie. So my minimal expectations for Boogie are kind of to put up an edge 5 level production or execution with the ability to maybe function in as a low end 4, depending on how the rotation shakes out, or, depending on what happens with injuries and all those pieces. I love what Zach says here. Whispers seductively disguise pressures. We're going to talk about that. We are going to talk about that. Whoa. Lauren comes in and says, prediction, Dorian Williams will be the Mike linebacker down the stretch. That is a very bold prediction and a very hot take and a very bold take. For that to happen, he would either two things. Dorian Williams has to either hit the ground running and take off like a rocket, or things fell apart at the linebacker position, or maybe a bit of both in conjunction with one another. But that would be a lot. RJ says, I have more faith in this defense. They have been consistently at the top of the league. The offense is a roller coaster. Fair point. That was a response earlier to Jason's comment. And my name is Jeff, says, Frazier's game plans were too inconsistent for me. They ranged from brilliant to uninspired. And that is something we're going to talk about here on this episode. For those of you just coming in or still in here now, whatever have you, watching later, watching live, if you haven't already, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video. I know it's corny, and I know it's corny to say, I know it's corny, but that goes a sincerely long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. Likes are the lifeblood of these live streams for the algorithm. So if you'd be so kind, drop a like on this video. It's sincerely appreciated by myself and the entire team here at Cover One. Now, we're going to dive into our first topic here. And the first topic, I didn't really know what to title it because I use like synonyms and different words throughout my notes for the entire piece. But this first piece is, as you see up on the screen, or if you're listening to audio only, the first topic here is tweaking the formula with specificity. And, some of your comments in the live chat here have already kind of alluded to this, the inconsistencies or the uninspired piece. of what the Bills defense has been at times. But I do want to start with some of the positives from an overarching perspective. In many ways, the Bills defense has been at the forefront of recent defensive trends and movements in the NFL. This notion of changing the pre to post snap picture and nickel personnel and light boxes and having the numbers advantage in coverage and more too high shells and more too high post snap coverages. The Bills have been at the forefront of that movement in terms of what they have used, in addition to just being a very coverage diverse team, which we are going to take a peek at in a bit. And, like RJ said, you don't have the consistent and continued success like the Bills defense has had in terms of being at or in or around the top 5 to 10 in DVOA year after year after year if you are a bad defense. Being a consistent threat in the entire AFC to go to the Super Bowl, to go to the AFC Championship, to be a regular favorite to win your division, all of these pieces, it doesn't happen if you're not a good defense. And so I want to put that into perspective right off the bat. I am going to talk about some things in terms of improvements or tweaks or dials that need to be turned more than they have been in the past. But with all of these pieces, as constructive as it is, and constructive in a positive way, I want it taken as that. This does not mean the Bills defense has been a bad defense. They could run out the exact same game plan they have the past several years. They're probably, at least for a regular season, from a regular season perspective, probably going to be a top 5 to 10 DVOA defense. They're going to be one of the best units in the league and one of the best well-coached units in the league. Even if they just run back what they've been doing previously, they're a good unit. They've been a good unit. The problem is, like we're going to get into, once they've gotten into these specific matchups, especially come playoff time, who and what they are and who and what they have been has been poked and prodded, and holes have been developed a bit, and who they are tends to, I don't want to say gets picked apart because that can be too severe at times, but they don't show out to the fullest in the way they do necessarily in the regular season. And I like the comment here from Jeff saying, love the half man, half zone they play at times. I have a clip of that with some film, ironically, that say, saying enough. Nikki coming in saying the league is switched to nickel. Now we got to get back to what we do best in muddy looks, but we got to start taking away the short throws. Timing QBs killed us last year. Fair point. So again, in many ways, the Bills defense has been at the forefront of these defensive trends and movements. Even just like a little example of what we saw the Chargers do to the Dolphins last year, what the Chargers did to the Dolphins offense in terms of their man coverage pieces and press and what they were doing. The Bills deployed and employed a lot of those pieces in their week 3 matchup against Miami. You saw them pressing and disrupting timing a lot against the Miami Dolphins. And I feel like, again, there's certain narratives that get put through when things don't work out. And when you're sitting there at the end of the season and a team is lost and your team puts together a bad performance, it's easy to look at the most recent piece and just harp on that and think, well, the defense played bad in this last game of the season, so the defense was awful all year. How come they didn't adjust? They didn't adjust in the game against Cincinnati, and that's because they weren't adjusting all year. They weren't changing game plans. They weren't matching up, yada, yada, so on and so forth. There are certain pieces to this defense that were strong last year. Again, on the whole, for these past several years, you don't continue to be a top 5 to 10 DVOA defense almost every single year since 2018 without being a well-coached unit and having capability from a roster perspective. Now, and there's a comment there from I'm not going to say the full word, but defense has been good. The problem was Frazier played safe in the playoffs. And I think that's a common notion that gets put through with this team. So what I want to talk about from, again, this topic perspective, tweaking the formula with specificity, I want to use a very specific example that the Bills did early in the season last year against the Kansas City Chiefs. It was talked about a bit earlier by, I think my name is Jeff, with his comment saying, love the half man, half zone pieces that they used. I want to bring up this screen. So this is the very last play of the Bills versus Chiefs in I forget what week, but when the Bills beat the Chiefs in the regular season last year. This is the interception from Taron Johnson that sealed the game, ended it for the Buffalo Bills, picks off Mahomes. Bills go home a winner 24-20. This play is, I feel like, is so representative of what the Bills could lean more into. Again, some of these pieces, this is a big point I want to state right now. Some of these pieces that we're going to talk about that I would like to see more of from the Buffalo Bills, it's just that it's more. It's not that they're not doing these things. It's not that they're not using these things. It's that they could use them more. They could turn those dials more. They could push those buttons more and further in order to increase their multiplicity and their fluidity on defense and the ability to play rock, paper, scissors, which you folks know is one of my favorite things. And I think this play encapsulates all of that. So you've got a combo coverage. You've got man up top from Dane Jackson here and Saron Neal here on the running back. And then towards the bottom, you've got zone for the rest of your defenders on the bottom half of the field. And really even too, Edmonds is in zone, Terran's in zone, Benford's in zone, Hamlin's in zone, Poyer's really in zone too. So you've got this like 5-over-3 type look, and then you've got man up top, right? So you've got the combo coverage. That's the first piece. The second piece is dime personnel. You have a defensive lineman off the field. You've only got 3. You got Groot, Ed, and Von Miller. And then you got Saron Neal here at the second level, lined up in an off-ball linebacker spot. He's manned up on the running back coming out of the backfield. So again, you got combo coverage, you've got dime personnel, and the last piece, something that myself and Eric Turner talked about last year in this game with Ted Wynn. We actually broke down this play after the Bills beat the Chiefs. The use of that odd mirror front, 3-down lineman, an aggressive spy with the idea of someone winning on the edge, in this case, Von Miller, coming and getting inside to flush the QB off his spot. And once that quarterback declares and gets pushed off that spot, your aggressive spy, in this case, Matt Milano, closes down. This piece, all of it, was a game plan specific piece against the Kansas City Chiefs. Even just the odd mirror piece alone, right? Again, that 3-down front, aggressive spy, getting the QB off his spot. That piece, the Bills weren't running that before with any type of regularity, or really any semblance of usage. This was a piece for this game that they put out into this game. They used it. I would say they sprinkled it in from time to time throughout the rest of the year. I wanted them to use it more because it was a piece that worked out so well for him in this game. Again, a lot of that was tied to Von Miller. Once he went down, it kind of changed a bit. But this game and this play in particular is just such a good representation of what this Bills defense could lean into more. A game plan specific piece. So again, tweaking the formula with specificity. And we'll roll this play so we can see what happens. And here we go. Oh, now it's loading. You're going to make me look like a fool. This is the second time this has happened to me. Back-to-back weeks. Maybe the last time it happened 2 weeks ago. Here we go. We're going to play? Oh, now you're going to play. Huddle trying to make me look foolish. Okay, here we go. So on the snap, boom. You see? We get the drag from over the middle. Actually, we'll start with the odd mirror piece because I like that. Watch Von Miller to the bottom of your screen. Right, y'all. We get the snap. Von Miller takes off a field, cuts inside. Again, if he can get to Mahomes, cool, awesome. But his idea and his design on this play is get Mahomes off his spot. So once he gets off his spot, you have this athletic, physical player who can match Mahomes' athleticism, if not probably be above that, and close down on him quickly. You are trying to get him off his spot, get him to declare his scramble, right? His evasion, and then you're clamping down on him. That's exactly what happens. Von gets inside, flushes Mahomes off the spot. There's Milano to close down. Milano also does a good job of getting, you can even see Mahomes, granted he does this a bunch, like cocking that sidearm throw because he has to throw around Milano because Milano is in that window. Now, let's tie it back to the coverage piece. So you got the odd mirror piece up front, gets Mahomes off his spot. Milano closes down. Now, you've got the man coverage piece on the back end. Dane following Sky Moore across the field, but you've got zone here. So Taron Johnson, you can see it already. He's got zone eyes. He's dropped into his zone, but he's watching Mahomes. He's keeping an eye on everything coming in front of him. He's scanning. Even Christian Benford is doing the same thing. Like Benford is dropping almost as like a cloud corner here. And so anything that's going to come underneath, he's going to peel off. He knows he has help over the top with DeMar Hamlin. So he's not just going to cover grass, which is why he sinks here. But when he sees Mahomes start to declare his throw combined with what he's seeing over here, he knows this ball is coming out to one of these guys. So even Benford's coming out. But we just focus on Taron Johnson right here. I'm sure this play everyone is familiar with. Mahomes chucks it. Taron jumps it. Interception. So again, the combination coverage, man, on the backside or man up top, zone to the bottom of the screen or the front, combined with the dime personnel, combined with that odd mirror look. All of these pieces put together were a game plan specific aspect to attack Patrick Mahomes, to attack the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, this was a very nice piece. Watch from this angle again. So Mahomes thinks this is man. Like, he sees Dane Jackson trailing Sky Moore, and he thinks, oh, cool, I got the drag. He also sees Edmonds clamping down on Kelsey. So he thinks, okay, cool. Let me scramble. Let me throw this drag. And then Taron comes out of nowhere because he gets fooled by the coverage and doesn't realize it's zone on the front side. That piece, again, was that example of what you can lean into a bit more of. So that last play of the game, the odd mirror, the dime personnel, the combo coverage, the Bills didn't change their identity or flip their philosophy on their head for that play or for that game, but they had a more curated game plan based on their opponent. The Bills need to lean into that on more of a week-to-week basis. And I'll use the team that the Bills lost to end their season last year, the Cincinnati Bengals. You think of the Cincinnati Bengals and the reputation that their defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo, has garnered over the past 2 seasons, really ever since that AFC Championship game against the Chiefs, where he utilized a lot of 3-man rushes and just stifled Mahomes in the second half. Each week, Lou Anarumo is curating a game plan, especially in big games, based on specificity designed to mitigate an offense's strengths and or attack their vulnerabilities, similar to what he did to the Bills in that division round game this past year to end the Bills season. He was throwing out inverted Tampa 2. He was using sims and creepers and delayed blitzes. He was confusing protections and using the Bills pass protection rules against them. He had speed rushers lined up over Roger Saffold to take advantage of his lack of foot speed and lack of side-to-side athleticism. And the Bills have done things like that from time to time. They have dabbled in those pieces, simulated pressures, creepers, delayed blitzes, especially early on in the Sean McDermott era, and even early on in the Sean McDermott, Leslie Frazier era. So again, these are all things that the Bills have utilized from time to time, especially coverage diverse pieces. But I think they need to lean more into it, move more away from, but not completely away from, their default settings and have more opponent-driven defensive game plans. So more of that rather than leaning more into their, kind of, we know who we are, you know who we are, try and beat us. Maybe we'll throw some curveballs in there, but even those curveballs aren't too diverse. So moving away from more of that and moving into more game plan specific, formulaic specificity type of defense. But as I mentioned earlier, on the whole, who the Bills have been from a large scale perspective has worked. Their overall philosophy these past several years of having numbers in coverage, getting to the quarterback with 4 or trying to get to the quarterback with 4, limiting explosives and forcing teams to be patient and efficient and execute consistently in order to beat them. That's a good formula and it's a good recipe for success overall. Daring teams to, again, have to not live by the big play and have to live by being patient and efficient and consistently having to execute against you. That's a fair game plan. And again, the Bills on the large have been successful doing that these past several years, 4 or 5 years, they've been successful. And part of that is it can be risky the more it can be risky the more specific or perfect you try to be. And I put the Bills defense in a perspective of like the Bills defense recently, again, en route to a lot of success for them, especially from a regular season standpoint. The Bills defense has been more broad spectrum antibiotics than specific medicine or specific treatment in recent years. And again, they've been largely successful being that and doing that. It's given them a high floor. It's allowed them to cover a majority of the bases, cast a wide net, and build a foundation of education and responsibility for their system and with their players. Casting that wider net, using, those broad spectrum antibiotics, it means you have the ability to potentially cure a wider range of sicknesses, i.e. to be able to fight multiple game plans, multiple schemes, multiple systems. Now, don't get it twisted from the overall perspective. Broad spectrum antibiotics work. They wouldn't be a thing if they didn't work, much like, again, the Bills system and scheme. They wouldn't be successful if they weren't a good defense these past several years. And especially the way the Bills have operated, like their version of broad spectrum antibiotics, they've added a little more potency to it to help it cure a wider variety of problems. The problem is, despite how potent it can be or the little specific elements you add to it, sometimes you need a more targeted medicine in order to treat an illness. And again, that comes with risks. And the piece of risk that comes with that is the more specific you go with your game plan, the more specific you go with the medicine or the treatment you use, the higher variance you can have, because you better be sure you know what the illness is if you're going for a specific type of medicine. If you're a doctor and someone comes in and they're sick, you better know exactly what it is that they have if you're going with specific medicine. If you think they have, strep throat and you're giving them, amoxicillin or something for it, like to try and treat that piece, you better hope that's what they have. You better hope it's not something else, because if you give them something to treat a specific illness that they don't have, you can make the illness that they do have worse by either, allowing it to, maybe the medicine makes it worse in and of itself, or just because of the idea of you're not treating what's actually wrong, the illness or sickness is able to spread, grow stronger, so on and so forth. In this case, from the Bills and from a football perspective, not from a doctor and medical perspective, although I know you're all extremely impressed with this analogy / metaphor / whatever it is. In this case, if you put together a curated game plan with specificity and the offense zigs when you thought they were going to zag, you're caught out and you're more vulnerable than you would have been if you just went with kind of that broad spectrum type of defense. The benefit of specificity, though, the benefit of that targeted medicine, that specific medicine, is that you can cure that illness quicker and more accurately instead of narrowing down the scope of what you're dealing with and trying to ascertain what's wrong. So if you come in with a targeted game plan designed to knock out or mitigate or hinder or eliminate whatever an offense does best, or significantly amplify what they struggle with or what they're vulnerable with, it leads to a higher potential for a bigger success rate, right? And the Bills, again, their broad spectrum antibiotics defense has led to large scale success, but letdowns come playoff time. We've talked about this on the show before. Who and what you are is on tape. Your entire resume for an entire season, your tendencies, your strengths, your weaknesses, what you like to do on third downs, what you like to do on third and short versus third and medium or third and long, what you like to do on third down in the red zone, what you like to do on third down when you have a team backed up on the goal line, anything, what your tendencies are on first down, coverages, anything and everything. What you are and who you are when you get to the playoffs is on tape. And teams know that, and teams know that other teams know that, and that's where that chess match kind of begins. But teams know how to attack you. And so you need a wrinkle or two. You need a tweak or two in order to be able to disrupt predictability and pinpoint offensive weaknesses. Again, like the Bills did versus the Kansas City Chiefs in the regular season last year, a more curated game plan with some wrinkles and tweaks thrown in, like the odd mirror piece, like the dime personnel piece. We know the Bills traditionally, are a 4-down team, not really going to blitz. Odd mirror is a tweak and a change up from that, but it's not a tweak or a change up for the sake of a tweak or a change up. It's a curated piece with design, with intent. Same thing with the dime personnel. They're not just leaving nickel for the sake of, tendency breaker. No, it's designed. It's got a purpose. It has intent. And so that Bills curated game plan against Kansas City last year, it was still one that stayed within who they were, and it wasn't breaking tendency for the sake of breaking tendency, because that's a bad thing. Let's also state that. I think everybody knows this, but you can't just come out and change everything just to come out and change everything. You don't want to have a tendency breaker just to have a tendency breaker. We talk about it on offense all the time, right? It's a nice tendency breaker if on second and long, you want to run the ball because you think the defense thinks you're going to pass the ball. But if your run game sucks, don't even bother running the ball on 2nd and 10. But if you're thinking, man, no, it'll be great because it's a tendency breaker. You don't want a tendency breaker for the sake of a tendency breaker. You still need to be able to execute. It needs to be valuable. It needs to have some semblance of impact. You can't just do it just to do it. And you have to be able to run those tendency breakers. You have to be able to execute them. And also just tying into the Bills' overall philosophy, again, that broad spectrum antibiotic piece, there's also a chance that your broad spectrum antibiotic type of defense will knock out whatever the offense has, and you can stay in that world. There's times when you just have a flat out talent advantage or a straightforward matchup advantage, and you can just lean into that. That's also possible, right? So there are times where, guys, we don't have to really curate too much. We're the better team, or we've got a big advantage for coverage versus their receiving pieces, or our defensive line versus their offensive line. We have the big advantage. We can stay kind of true to who we are. We don't have to curate too much. We can come out and go with that piece. There are times where that will happen as well. So I wanted to mention that. And again, on the whole, the Bills defense has not been bad. I know they get talked about as being too generic or too vanilla, which I really don't think they are, especially with how much match coverage they play and especially with how much coverage diversity they have from a usage standpoint on the back end. They have, over the past several years, run an adjustment / rules-based defense with a healthy variety of coverages that operates within a base structure that allows them to stay as fluid as possible as plays progress. But offenses and offensive talent and offensive skill sets have become so diverse and so multiple that they can work the Bills into static looks at times in both their fronts and their coverages. And it's very hard in today's NFL to stay static and consistently win. You cannot come out and just, we're always going to play quarters. I'm not saying the Bills do this, but you can't be a defense now where we're always going to play Tampa 2. We're always going to play quarters. We're always going to play cover 3. We're always going to play man, cover 1 or man 2. And especially once you get to the playoffs, when your whole season is on tape, when your whole catalog is available and teams know who and what you are from a schematic standpoint and from a percentage standpoint and a data and advanced metric standpoint, you have to have different pivot points and different off-speed elements to your game and to your pitches than just your regular fastball, than just your regular default plan that you normally go with. You have to have those tweaks. It's very hard, again, to stay static and consistently win on defense in today's NFL. It's hard to have a blanket answer for everything. Even if your blanket is really good and really soft and really sound, it's hard to live that way. But again, with having those pieces, with wanting to see those tweaks and seeing more changes, which we're going to get into from a specific standpoint, again, I did want to highlight the Bills have been at the forefront of a lot of these movements from a positive standpoint. And one piece I wanted to bring up, even just like a coverage diversity standpoint. So this graphic, and you folks know these past several weeks, been really impressed with my graphic game. This one's beautiful. I love the left to right, the dark to light blue, shade transition. It's just absolutely beautiful. I think I'm the Van Gogh of my generation, or whichever artist, Rembrandt, whatever. I don't really know too many artists, but nonetheless, here we are. So on the far left, we've got 2020. In the middle, we've got 2021. And on the far right, we have 2022. I've got coverage snaps listed in red next to each year. And then what you see, pretty simple, in each column there, the coverages the Bills play, the amount of snaps that they have in those coverages, and then the percentage of their usage rate for those coverages, again, out of how many coverage snaps. So in 2020, 568 coverage snaps, 2021, 530 coverage snaps, in 2022, 564. So putting those numbers in perspective. And these are regular season numbers as well. So if you look, and everything is the same all the way across. So you've got cover 6 is the top line for each column, cover 4 is the second, cover 2 is the third, so on and so forth, all those pieces. And if you look at everything, there are some areas where they've trended differently. And if we just go line by line, cover 6 has largely been the same, not too much variance or changing there. Cover 4, roughly in the same range, 23.1%, then 19.2, then back up to 21.1. Cover 2 has by far been their biggest, from an increase standpoint, biggest increase in usage rate over these last 3 years. So only 8.5% in 2020, up to 12.5% in 2021, and then 17.7% in 2022. Again, seeing more of that too high look. And again, too high coverages. So in things that have split field safety. So your cover 6s, your cover 4, your cover 2, even 2-man, even though it's man, don't think that, too high just means zone. So 2-man, where you have two split safeties and then everyone's playing man underneath. Those too high coverages, the Bills lean into that more. You see a big difference there with cover 2. 2-man, went up in 2022, especially in comparison with where they were in 2020. It was a pretty steady increase. And then you see the cover 3 numbers, which this is the biggest as far as a drop standpoint. The Bills were a heavy cover 3 team in 2020. It was their number one coverage played in both from a volume standpoint in terms of snaps in a coverage, but also from a percentage point standpoint at 27.5. Then they dipped to 21.9 in 2021, and then dipped further to 20% here in 2022. And that's a similar piece with the cover 1 numbers, no pun intended, overall. They did go up from 2020 to 2021, but then went down to 2022. Again, you start to see that piece of more of a prevalence of too high coverages. Again, that's what the league is doing. More too high coverages. You get more too high shells pre-snap, which the Bills do a lot. That's how you disguise coverage, so on and so forth. Though you can disguise coverage with single high safeties as well. But you see the coverage versatility. You see the Bills' ability to deploy a variety of coverages. Again, they're not playing a ton of cover 6. They're not playing a ton of 2-man, and they're not playing a ton of cover 0. But that's a healthy amount almost year after year of cover 4, cover 2, cover 3, and cover 1. You've got 4 coverages that you can confidently lean into. And again, some of these are just regular spot drop zone coverage pieces. Some of them are match coverage pieces. Some of them, they're in press. Some of them, they're in off. And that could go for the man coverages as well. So there's also those little tweaks that the Bills employ from an overall structure standpoint or an alignment standpoint, pre-snap and post-snap. So there are tweaks and variance pieces the Bills defense has leaned into over the past several years. I wanted to put these coverages into perspective just for you folks all to be able to see, because I think with the way the Bills season ended last year against the Cincinnati Bengals, and even to a degree how the Bills defense played against Kansas City in the playoffs the year before, I think when the Bills struggle, they get this rap of being too simplistic or too vanilla or too soft not from a physical standpoint, but from like where they align, right? They have more diversity and more variability on the back end than I think they necessarily get credit for recently because of the way this past season ended. So just looking and seeing all of the coverages that they play, again, this is a healthy amount of variation. This is a healthy amount of keeping offenses on their toes. Now, there are going to be pieces from a negative standpoint where, because you're not really blitzing a lot, because you're not really disguising your fronts, teams can kind of dictate to you or anticipate what coverage you're going to be in certain scenarios and kind of pick at those holes. But again, because the Bills play a good amount of match coverage, they are reacting in the moment based on the route distribution. So they're not static on the back end. They might be static from an overall coverage standpoint in terms of knowing what they're going to be in, but they still have the opportunity to remain fluid, which again, on the whole, from a large sample size perspective in the regular season, is why they continue to be a formidable unit year after year, especially even this past year, right? Hyde goes down, Poyer goes down, and then when he comes back, he's not playing 100%. They're working Tre'Davious White back from an ACL. They start Christian Benford. They have to put in Jamarcus Ingram against the Miami Dolphins. They're working in Cam Lewis at safety and Jaquan Johnson and DeMar Hamlin, and then Kyer Elam is in and out. And you have Dane Jackson. You've got all these injuries to the secondary last year, and the Bills didn't really have too many pain points, even against high-powered offense or highly skilled players from a weapon standpoint. Part of that is the system and the coaching, but again, it speaks to their ability that even when they're kind of down from a top tier or body count perspective, they're still able to lean into a variety of coverages. They're not hamstrung to the point, well, we have to play cover 2. Well, we have to play cover 4. We can only play this one piece. So even in a year where they were banged up a lot on the back end, they were still able to function in a variety of ways in 2022. Again, to be, 20% in cover 4 or above 20% in cover 4 and in cover 3, and then being very close to 20% in cover 1 and in cover 2, like you have a pretty almost an equal amount of variation across a significant amount of coverages that allow you to do a lot of things. So again, as I speak going forward now about tweaks I want and more specificity and more variability to this defense, I wanted to put this into perspective because the Bills have had variance. The Bills have had coverage diversity and defensive diversity overall, which is why they continue to combat a variety of opponents and perform successfully and strongly in those areas. But good comment here from John saying nobody talks about the injuries we had last year. We were a walking mash unit. Yeah. Started on the back end early with Hyde going down against Tennessee, and then Benford goes down against Miami. And again, remember in that Miami game, the corners for the majority of the first Miami Dolphins game in week 3 were Kyer Elam and Jamarcus Ingram playing against Jalen Waddle and playing against Tyreek Hill. And then in that Miami game, their starting safeties were Jaquan Johnson and DeMar Hamlin. And then you're bringing back Dean Marlowe because you need help at safety. And that's not even taking into account the defensive line with Ed Oliver and Jordan Phillips, and Daquan Jones goes down in the biggest game of the year against Cincinnati, and Von Miller goes down in Detroit. All these pieces. So that's a good point there, John. I feel like that's a fair point there. Now let's take down the graphic there. I want to pull up some comments that coming through. Les Brown says, is this likely to change with McDermott running the D? Hope to see more aggressive defense from the Bills this year. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Steven says, question, Ant, cover 4 is quarters, right? A version of cover 2. I wouldn't say it's a version of cover 2. They're both just versions of 2 high coverages or split safety looks. Cover 4, it depends on the terminology you use sometimes, right? Like when I say quarters, it is technically cover 4, but when I say quarters, for me, that means like match coverage. Cover 4 is more spot drop like you would see in Madden, which isn't played too much anymore. But in essence, on large scale, yeah, cover 4 is quarters, but I wouldn't classify it as a version of cover 2. I'm glad Ralph recognized my Vincent Van Gogh reference. Oh, and I see what you did there, Vincent Van Gogh Bills. Well done. Well done. Well done. That took me back. That was a good one. So again, that piece, the coverage versatility piece, I think that needs to be recognized because, again, I don't want this Bills defense previously, despite the failures that they had and despite the tweaks we need to see them have this year to quote unquote get over the hump. I don't want the thought being, well, yeah, it's because they've been too vanilla or too generic or too predictable or all these things. You saw those coverage numbers in terms of their usage rates. And again, that speaks to what you see on tape. That speaks to their formidable nature from a coverage standpoint on the back end, because they can play a multitude of coverages. They can play them in spot drop. They can play them in zone. They can play them in match coverages. They can spin from 2 high to single high post snap. They disguise coverage. They change the pre to post snap picture. Like, they do so many things well from a coverage standpoint. They play a little bit of everything, which leads to this next piece mentioned earlier, like what we would like to see from Sean McDermott. So this leads into what Sean McDermott as defensive coordinator means in the big picture. So you've got this defense that is very coverage diverse from a usage rate standpoint and from a practical application standpoint. Again, you want them to play. No one's going to play a ton of every single coverage in the book. Again, they've got some smatterings of everyone, but to sit there and have healthy usage rates of cover 4, cover 2, cover 3, and cover 1, then being able to throw combo coverages in there, then being able to throw some simulated pressures in there, mixing in press versus off and a variety of games. Again, you have a coverage diverse group, both schematically and from a data standpoint when it comes to a usage rate standpoint, right? So how this ties into Sean McDermott as a defensive coordinator, when I was on Locked On Bills, one of the 2 times I was on Locked On Bills in the past month, but Sean McDermott as a defensive coordinator, his history, where he comes from as a student learning how to be a DC under Jim Johnson in Philadelphia, to what he used when he was in Carolina as their DC, taking them to a Super Bowl in 2015. Sean McDermott, as a defensive coordinator, he's aggressive. He wants an aggressive, fast defense that dictates to an offense. He wants more games up front, more versatility up front to pair with their versatility on the back end, more blitzes, more sims, more creepers, more disguised fronts. And these are all pieces that he's employed at different times, and I think he needs to lean into more as defensive coordinator now. Again, you've got a very coverage diverse group on the back end. You need to start to add to that in terms of the diversity you show up front, the games you show up front. And again, they have shown a bit. We've seen the Bills use two-man games and stunts and twists. We've seen them blitz from time to time. We know they use simulated pressures and creeper pressures, but lean into those a little more. And I'm not saying become a 3-4 team. Blitz 50% of the time. Use a simulated pressure on every third down. No, sometimes it's just turning the dial from a 2 to a 3 or from a 3 to a 5 instead of just leaving it at a 1 or being a 1.5. Just anything you can do to add to your variance, add to your unpredictability, add to the variability and multiplicity you have. And with Sean McDermott, you folks who listen to the show regularly, you know I love the rock, paper, scissors analogy. For those who don't know, or for those who do know and just want a little refresher anyway, it's the idea of if you're playing rock, paper, scissors, you need to be able to throw rock, paper, and scissors. If you're playing rock, paper, scissors against somebody and you can only throw rock, that means you're only winning if someone throws scissors. If they throw rock, you cancel out. If they throw paper, you lose. That means you only have a 1 in 3 chance of winning, right? And if anybody knows Scott Steiner math, that's not great. So when you're playing rock, paper, scissors, you need to be able to throw all three. With Sean McDermott, I think, and I hope, there's more rock, paper, scissors capability for this defense. More of, hey, this is a rock week, so we're going to throw rock. Next week's a paper week, we're going to throw paper, etc., and so on and so forth. So more of that, we're going to throw all three. More of, this is a rock week, next week is a paper week. Less of, this is who we are, try and beat us. More of, we're going to be whoever we need to in order to beat you. And I think that is where successful defenses are going. You see the defenses that do well come playoff time, that do well from a matchup standpoint, that when they play top-tier offenses or play in these big games, they consistently are able to show up. I think what the Saints have done for years. We talked about the Cincinnati Bengals. We talked about the Kansas City Chiefs. I have on the show before, not tonight, but what Steve Spagnuolo has done in from his designer packages on third down and how he kind of chokes you into a certain point and then picks at you from that spot, and what he does in big games. And there's a variety of other coaches and defenses that do that. Nikki's saying if you throw rock every time, it's a 2 out of 3 chance because you don't lose if they throw rock. Yeah, but I'm talking about like a winning standpoint. I know that, like, if you throw rock, and they throw rock, you cancel out. But you can only win if they throw scissors. If they throw paper, you lose. If they throw rock, you cancel. So the only way you can win is if they throw scissors, and that's not a consistent way to win, just only being able to have that piece. RJ gets it. So you're telling me we have a 141 2/3 chance of winning a sacrifice. Steiner math, one of the best promos of all time. Well done, RJ. I appreciate you for that. So again, with Sean McDermott, I think it becomes you have more rock, paper, scissors capability for this defense. Less of this is who we are, try and beat us, and more we're going to be whoever we need to be every week in order to beat you. And they have the roster for that. They at all three levels, maybe not linebacker as much now, but we're going to talk about that piece. And again, I want to tie this into who Sean McDermott is and where he learned defense from. So he learned the basis for his 4-3 defensive philosophy from one of the best of all time, former Eagles defensive coordinator, Jim Johnson. And the whole system is based on pressuring the quarterback and pressuring the offense in both the pass and run game. Again, it's aggressive, it's fast. You dictate to an offense, you attack an offense. So, and pieces of this came from just different places that I researched, and also an article, I believe it was on ESPN, back when the Panthers went to the Super Bowl, were coming out of it, talking about what Sean McDermott did in kind of evolving Jim Johnson's scheme. So Jim Johnson's scheme was really built on sophisticated zone blitzes, but kind of putting his own designer tweak on it. And Sean McDermott, he calls his defense at that time player friendly. He, quote, builds around the strengths of players and finds ways to cover up weaknesses. He doesn't try to turn a 3-4 defensive end into a 4-3 defensive end. And there's an important quote here from Sean McDermott in this article back, in his Carolina Panthers DC days as they're going to the Super Bowl and being a consistently strong unit year after year. Sean McDermott says, quote, "That's important. Rather than tying up your players with intricate schemes and things, we can certainly do that, but it's like the game of chess. At the same time, a player has to be able to execute and play fast and be fundamentally sound. Again, just reading it, whole thing again, that's important. Rather than tying them up with intricate schemes and things, McDermott said, we can certainly do that. It's like the game of chess, but at the same time, a player has to be able to execute and play fast and be fundamentally sound. I think that's going to be a piece that we see more in this defense, more aggression and more attack-minded defense, allowing the players to play fast. Tying this into the coverage versatility piece that we talked about in the previous graphic, there were times where this Bills defense was playing, and on the back end, they almost had too many checks and too many rules. Again, like I mentioned earlier, they were a rules-based, adjustment-based defense. So on this play, whoever's first at the flat, that's your man. If number 2 does this, that's your man. If number 1 goes in, you leave him and you do this. If he goes above 5 yards or out, he's yours and do this. So there's all these reads and adjustments that you have to make in real time. And if you're the outside corner, you have to see it that way. The slot corner has to see it that way. Your safety has to see it that way. Your linebacker has to see it that way, so on and so forth. And teams know that. So teams will use your rules against you. And at times, then you have information overload and you're not able to play and react. You're not able to read and react. You're almost bogged down with the whole, paralysis by analysis, because you're trying to figure out everything and operate with your rules and operate with your adjustments, and you kind of get bogged down. But McDermott, again, wants players to be able to execute and play fast and be fundamentally sound. And tying that in again with that Jim Johnson piece, Jim Johnson was known at the time as a defensive genius. He was famed again for his creative zone blitzes, double A gap looks, and exotic game plans. A lot of what Sean McDermott used in Carolina. And Jim Johnson's big thing too, he adapted to his personnel. Some coaches believe in their system, and if you don't fit that system, they get rid of you. Jim Johnson liked doing things a certain way, but he was creative when he had a talented player. And the idea was you don't let an offense dictate to you. You have to put more pressure on the quarterback and the offense, and every year try to figure out how to do that. He used safety pressures. That was a hallmark of his scheme. He had a fast, aggressive, physical, violent attitude type of defense. He was also very big in changing the pre to post snap picture, causing havoc, causing confusion at multiple levels of the defense, not just changing the pre to post snap picture on the back end and in coverage, but doing it with your fronts, doing it with your defensive line and where you line up your linebackers, all those pieces. And Asante Samuel played under Jim Johnson on the Eagles, and Asante Samuel said, one thing I got from being around Jim was his system was his system. He didn't change a whole lot from week to week, but it was all about finding out what your weak point is on offense. His dogs were his dogs, and he was going to cut them loose on you one way or another. That second to last sentence was huge for me. It was all about finding out what your weak point is on offense. That's what Sean McDermott did in Carolina as well, learning that from Jim Johnson with his time in Philly. I think, and again, part of me is me thinking this, and also what I would like them to do is see the Bills turn more dials of diversity in terms of their coverage paired with their fronts. Again, we showed that graphic and we talked about it. They are a very diverse coverage group in terms of what coverages they get into. And again, the coverages they get into, they play them well, they deploy them well, they switch back and forth and make you think it's going to be single high when it's too high. They make you think it's going to be zone when it ends up being man, vice versa. They play games with quarterbacks and offense, and they do a good job on the back end. They limit explosives, they keep things in front of them, they clog the passing lanes and the passing windows and make you have to beat them with good throws, good reads, timing, and precision. But I'd like to see the Bills, again, turn more of those diversity dials in terms of coverage paired with their fronts, making it, a realistic idea to the offense that a blitz or a simulated pressure may be coming instead of just, it looks like they're going to show pressure, but knowing them, they're probably just going to drop out and rush forward and play coverage. Again, the Bills are already a good defense, and they have a good recipe and or formula for success. They just need a few tweaks here and there to become more matchup proof and more fluid and reduce the opportunity for offenses to dictate to them. Already coming into this year, they do a great job of disguising coverage. wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and utilizing a variety of coverages. And again, not just utilizing them for the sake of utilizing them. They're not just playing cover 4 to play cover 4, and they're not just playing cover 3 to play cover 3. They play these coverages well. They disguise them well. They execute them well against a variety of route concepts and play concepts and route combinations and route distributions. But I would like to see them lean more into disguising their fronts and using a further variety of fronts and personnel, especially paired with their coverages and honestly, even with their coverage pieces to a degree. And some of that is the nature of today's NFL defenses as a whole, which we're going to further talk about in a bit. But a lot of it too is because what they have on the roster now, the defensive line additions that they have with Gregory Rousseau's progression, with the addition of Leonard Floyd, with the addition of Poona Ford, with what you have in Jordan Phillips, what you have in Ed Oliver, what you have in Von Miller, what you have in Daquan Jones, you've got the capability to play different fronts. You can line up players in different alignments. You can take Poona Ford and line them up in a 0 or a 1 tech or a 4-eye or a 3 tech, or sometimes even put him in a 5. Seattle used him everywhere. You can take Daquan Jones and line him up in a 0 or a 1 tech or a 3 tech or a 4-eye. You can take Ed Oliver and put him kind of almost anywhere. You can line up Greg Rousseau on the inside. There's all these games that you can play from just a pure alignment perspective, from a pure front perspective, instead of just being your standard, hey, 4 down front, 2 5s, a 3 tech, a 1 tech, 4-3 over front, pretty static, standard, are going to 1 gap, going to penetrate, try to get upfield. You don't have to live in that world. You don't have to live in that world anyway, even if you don't have the personnel for it. But when you have the personnel for it, it means you can have diversity up front and actually use it for what it is. Instead of just being diverse to be diverse, you can be diverse with a purpose. You can be diverse with intent because you've got the skill sets and the body types to be able to execute these variety of looks up front. And then you start to pair it with mugging A gaps or putting linebackers up on the line of scrimmage on the outside or overloading one side. And then you bring pressure and you bring a real blitz, or you bring a simulated, or you drop out and play coverage. The havoc that you can create by disguising your looks up front and turning the dials up in terms of what you run and how much you run it to add more confusion, to add more thought to an offensive line, to a quarterback. And then you start to dictate protection. Then you start to confuse QBs and offensive line, and then you create free runners, or you create, some hesitation in their mind, and all of a sudden they're a half second slower because they're thinking for a half second longer. All those pieces. You can run more games and stunts up front with who you have on the defensive line. If Kyer Elam wins the cornerback 2 battle, you can play more man coverage, whether press or off. You can still play man with Dane Jackson and Christian Benford, but the ceiling for Kyer Elam, again, it's really tied to that scheme versatility piece. You can lean even more into man coverages in a variety of ways, in combo coverages, in press, in off, in match coverage, spot drop, all of these pieces you can use more because you've got coverage diverse players on the back end. If it's Kyer, Trey White, Jordan Poyer, and Micah Hyde. You can also use more sub packages this year. If you want to lean into a 4 down front, but 3 of those are Von Miller and Leonard Floyd and Greg Rousseau, or early in the year, if Epinesa turns out the way I think he could, Epinesa and Floyd on the outside and Greg Rousseau lined up over the center or the guard, or maybe you kick Ed Oliver out to edge and let him rush straight up and try and beat a man around the corner with his get off and his speed, or you have him spike inside, you run a 2-man game. Maybe you take out your linebacker, one of your linebackers on 3rd down, and leave Matt Milano in there and Taylor Rapp, someone who we continue to talk about on the show. You get that Raptor package in there. Shout out to Chris Kepner from Cover 1. Maybe you get Taylor Rapp in there as that dime linebacker. You're just running 3 safety looks in general. And then offenses don't know, okay, are they going to be in a 2 high look? Are they going to be in a single high look? Who are the 2 safeties going to be? Maybe you're using Taylor Rapp a bunch as that dime linebacker and lining him off ball in the box. And offenses start to think of that a little bit. And then you get creative on a 3rd down or a known passing down, or even early on 1st and 2nd down. And maybe you spin Jordan Poyer down and you have him replace and take Rapp's spot. It's almost kind of like a robber or a lurk type of aspect coming from the top. And then you drop Taylor Rapp deep and you go to a split high look or a single high look. There's all this potential for games, for variation, for masking who you are and masking what you're doing because of the personnel that you have. So that's a piece as well. A big piece as well for what this, means coming into the season, what Sean McDermott as defensive coordinator means in the big picture, because all the things that I'm mentioning of what the Buffalo Bills defense needs to do, quote unquote, needs to do, or the tweaks that they need to use, or what dials they need to turn a little more. Those are all pieces that Sean McDermott has experience with, has familiarity with, both in terms of him being a student of the game and learning under Jim Johnson, but also in terms of practical application with what and who he was as the defensive coordinator of the Carolina Panthers in his time there. All of these pieces that you want to see more challenging of an offense, more man coverage, more press coverage, more physicality on the outside, more, okay, who's rushing and who's coming from where, more creativity in your fronts, more creative blitz packages, more simulated pressures, all of these things. Leaning into that is in Sean McDermott's wheelhouse. And on top of that, the Bills now have the personnel on this defense to lean into that variability, to lean into that diversity. Again, sometimes you don't have the bodies for it, right? I always want to have as much front. We'll use the defensive line as an example. I always want to have as much diversity in my fronts as possible. I don't want to just be a 4-3, even if you're mainly a 4-3. I want to run some under. I want to run some bare front at times. I love the tight front with the 4-eye, the 0 and the 4-eye. I love overloading a side and doing different things. You can't do that if you don't have the personnel for it. It's nice in theory, but if you don't have the horses that can run the system, then you're running a system just to run a system. And that doesn't work. You have to tailor your game plan like Jim Johnson did in Philly, like Sean McDermott did in Carolina, and learning under Jim Johnson in Philly. And like I mentioned in those quotes, you have to tailor your game plan to the roster you have. But what's nice is, again, modern NFL defenses are trending into this world of specificity, of having specific answers for specific situations and specific play calls, trends, moments. Situational football is huge. Red zone and third down is your two low-hanging fruit kind of poster child aspects for situational football. But it's hard, like I mentioned earlier, to live in a world where you just have a blanket answer for everything. Yeah, we're going to come out and we're going to play cover 3 and it's going to be awesome. Those things are hard. Seattle was able to do it a bunch, granted because they leaned in some other pieces as well, but they had generational talents and really tremendous fits for what they were doing with Richard Sherman and Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor and Bobby Wagner and Michael Bennett up front, and even KJ Wright, all of those pieces. But it's hard to sit and just be like, we're going to live in Tampa 2. We're going to live in cover 3. We're going to be a 3-4 zone blitzing team. We're going to be a 46 defense team. There's not this blanket answer defensive structure or system in today's NFL like there potentially was in, systems past or generations past or decades past, however you want to eras past type of thing. Offenses have so much specificity. There's so much even just taking personnel packages. Offenses can dictate to you just by being like, yeah, we're going to go 13 personnel. Yeah, we're going to go 12. Yeah, we're going to go spread. We're going to run the ball this game. We're going to do this. Look at the Chiefs. Look what the Chiefs did last year, leaning into 13 personnel, leaning into more 12 personnel, still being able to run spread, being able to run power spread, being able to run the ball, and then also just having Andy Reid dial up whatever he can do and using Patrick Mahomes to his fullest, and Mahomes just kind of creating off script. Granted, maybe they're the extreme of the example, but the piece of all of that is you've got offenses now that are able to lean into a multitude of concepts, both in the run game and in the pass game. Having one blanket system answer, it's hard to consistently live that way. Now, the Bills, their system largely has worked for them year after year after year. But when it comes playoff time, we see the foundation start to shake a little bit, start to show some cracks, start to crumble a little bit. And that's the big piece of why they really need to lean into this rock, paper, scissors aspect. Again, I think that the quote that I really want to leave you all with from my notes, of what Sean McDermott can do with this defense is, again, on a week-to-week basis, having it be less of this is who we are, try and beat us, and having it be more of we're going to be whoever we need to be week in and week out in order to beat you. So if that means this week is going to be a heavy blitz week, cool. If this week means we're in less nickel, cool. If this is a Taylor Rapp week, cool. If this is a big simulated pressure week, cool. And the Bills, again, have dabbled. They've turned the dials briefly in all these spots in previous years in certain games. I think it all needs to be ratcheted up. You need more and as much, I should say. You need as much versatility and diversity from the front to the back of your defense week in and week out. You need matchup specific defense. You need game plan specific defense. And I'm not saying, again, the Bills haven't been developing matchup pieces and matchup game plans and targeting specific aspects of offense. I'm not saying that, but they need to do it more. They need to do what we're seeing these defenses do come playoff time, when all of a sudden you've got a Cincinnati Bengals unit. Again, I'm going to keep going back to the Bengals, but you've got a unit that was like, they're an okay defense. They're like top 10. They're like top 15, 14, 15. And all of a sudden come playoff time, they're this complete standout unit because they have a coordinator who uses this matchup specific game plan. And again, the Bills have done that. I showed that Kansas City tape in the beginning for a reason. That game is a microcosm of what I'm talking about. You have, and that might even be a hyper example of it, because the Bills lean into that odd mirror piece, which they really had never done before. That was a specific game plan, wrinkle, tweak, whatever you want to call it, put in for that game. More of that from this team. More targeted specificity, more targeted tweaks designed to attack a certain point of an offense. It could be a coverage piece. It could be a front piece. It could be more blitzes. It could be mixing all of it in. And then you get all of that on tape and you show an offense come playoff time, man, they can kind of hit a little bit of everything. Oh, man, they have an answer for 11 personnel. Man, they have an answer for 12. Oh, man, look how diverse their third down rush package is. Oh, man. And then you tie it in with who the Bills defense already is, with all their coverage versatility and their coverage diversity, and you become a defensive unit that week in and week out, you can throw rock, you can throw paper, you can throw scissors. Then you start to become matchup proof. And then you can dictate to teams almost no matter what you want. Oh, we're playing a team that's throwing scissors this week? Cool. We're throwing rock. Oh, next week is a team that throws rock? Cool. We're throwing paper. Oh, now we got a paper team? Cool. We're throwing scissors week and week and week and week after week in and week out. And it could be even adjustments in game, right? Because that's the part too I want to tie in from that beginning piece. When you go with those game plan specific types of game plans, when you get more targeted medicine and less broad spectrum antibiotics, you got to be sure that you know what you're treating. You got to be sure what that illness or that sickness is. And if you're not, you got to be able to pivot quickly. Oh, we thought it was this. Cool. After the first quarter, we realized they're not doing what we thought they were going to do. We got to pivot. We got to switch. We have to adjust in that moment. Having that fluidity, right? Being like Bruce Lee and being like water and just being able to go wherever you need to. That's that piece. And I think you'll get that with Sean McDermott. You know, it's just going to depend on how much does he turn those dials? How many of those buttons does he push? But his background speaks to pinpointed, targeted, attacking types of defense, game plan specific defenses, matchup specificity. And the unit that he has and what he's done already in overseeing this team the past several years, again, they've already got the coverage diversity piece. They just need to lean more into several of those coverage pieces, but especially tying it into their fronts and more diversity up front and more variation in terms of what they put on tape to show that they can get to anything and everything. So when you get when it comes down to it, instead of having an identifier or this is who we are, no, who we are is based on who you are. And we're going to be able to be fluid. If you're a run team, cool. We're a run defense team this week. Oh, you're a spread team? Cool. We're in numbers and coverage type of group this week. Oh, you're a 12 personnel team this week? Cool. We're a 3 linebacker team this week. Whatever you need to do. They have the personnel for it. They have the coach for it. And again, this is where defenses are trending. This is part of why having so many chess pieces and jack of all trades players is starting to trend even more in today's NFL, in the quote unquote positionless NFL. So you can have a body on the field and you're not at a disadvantage when an offense goes into any personnel grouping. So it's like, oh, they're in 12. We got to switch. We got to have a different package in there. Oh, they're in 11 or they're in 10. We got to switch and have a different personnel package. That's why so many of these types of frames and skill sets and positionless quote unquote football is becoming so popular now. So that way you can be matchup proof. It's all tied to this idea of being able to get to anything and everything whenever you need to based on the opponent you have, because offenses can do that. Offenses have the ability now to kind of get to anything and everything they want to. And you got to be able to match that on defense, both in terms of your roster, which I think the Bills have, but then you need to have the ability to employ those schemes and those systems with regularity to be able to show offenses that you can kind of do whatever you want. You can match whatever the hell they want to do. And I think that's what Sean McDermott means in the big picture as defensive coordinator for the Bills in 2023. Again, I think it means less, this is who we are, try and beat us type of defense. And it means more, we're going to be whoever we need to in order to beat you type of defense. And I think that comes from his past, the tree that he comes from, the current roster the Bills have on defense, and then tying it all together with what we're seeing from a trends perspective amongst NFL defenses that are consistently formidable year in and year out, which the Bills have been. They've just faltered come playoff time with some of their game plans, some of their execution pieces. And I think part of that is because they've relied too much on, hey, the system's the system, let's make this team beat us, instead of using more, again, like that Kansas City game where they had the odd mirror package and more combo coverages and dime personnel, instead of having those targeted tweaks. And it doesn't have to be a ton. Again, it doesn't have to be, hey, this week they need to run dime personnel 90% of the time. Hey, this week they need to use odd mirror on like 70% of snaps. No, it's going to vary every week. Sometimes it might only, be 5 snaps. Sometimes it might be 15, but having the ability to know that's where it comes down to the defensive coordinator, right? And the game plan piece. We'll see what we get from that aspect. I know there was a lot of comments that were coming through. Whitetown's King says, I rewatched the Steelers and Vikings games recently, and I seen Tyrell Dotson was always a step late in the pass game. Are we going to be able to hide the middle linebacker either with a scheme or hide the rookie? I think my thought right now, I think Terrell Bernard is the starter for this year, and I don't think you have to hide him as much. I'm not holistically confident in him, but I think he can do enough from a coverage standpoint, mentally, and enough athletically that you're not completely vulnerable there. I think Dodson, you have to change the scheme too much. He's not built for the type of coverages you want to play in the middle of the field from a physical standpoint and in a frame and physiological standpoint. You're not getting that with him. Maybe Dorian Williams can be that guy long-term. I don't think he is now because of, and I'll say this out because I know there's a bunch of people who are beckoning for Dorian Williams earlier in this episode. I just think the defense he comes from is too simplistic. Like they run a lot of spot drop coverages in today's football world where teams don't really do that, especially in the NFL. So he's got to work on his processing, his reading, his diagnosing, how to pick up certain routes in the route distribution and how to wall off 3 and carry and match this and carry 2 vertically and know everything that he's supposed to communicate. I think it's a lot from an adjustment standpoint for him. I don't think Klein has the legs. I don't think Dodson has the legs. I think Bernard is kind of the least of all evils. But you are going to have to mitigate that role. I expect more single high coverages from the Bills this year, regardless, because part of the reason why they were able to play so many 2 high coverages these past several years and be able to have that diversity, play cover 2 or Tampa 2 or quarters or cover 4 was because you had this unicorn in the middle of the field who I know everybody rags on him, but he was a deterrent for a lot of things and allowed a lot of those coverage, that coverage versatility and coverage diversity to function because of what he did. Oh, Rick saying illuminating Ant-Man. I had no idea. Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. What else? Brando saying, you think he'll be more aggressive than Frazier? Yes, I would expect an uptick in blitz percentage. I would expect to see more press. I would expect to see more bodies around the line of scrimmage in known passing situations. Could be on early downs, could be on third downs, might just be on early downs just for the hell of it. I would expect more of just the general idea of, man, are they going to blitz? Are they dropping into coverage? Oh, okay, they're only going to rush 4, but which 4 are coming? Like, who's dropping into coverage? Are they running any stunts, or is anybody looping? Like, are they running a delayed blitz? Is it a simulated? Like, I think what you'll have with Sean McDermott is more rewinding of your TV to figure out what just happened, both up front and in coverage. And I think that's a big feather in a coach's cap when you can say that. Coach Chapman says, I think you've seen when Sean would make defensive calls, the Bills would blitz and attack more. Frazier has always been a get pressure with 4, go back to his Minnesota days, rush 4 with mixed coverages. McDermott, to a degree, like, again, even in Carolina, he was a 4 down, 4 rush kind of guy. And I ideally, I think I would love to live in that world. If you only have to rush 4 to get pressure, that means you always have 7 in coverage. You always have the numbers advantage. I would love to consistently be in that realm. The problem is you just have to be really, really good up front to be able to consistently live in a world where you're only rushing 4. Like, you've got to have dogs, not even just in your starters. You need to be like 4, 5, 6 deep from a rotation standpoint in order to consistently generate pressure with just 4. And I McDermott was that to a degree in Carolina, but even with Charles Johnson and K'Wan Short and the guys who he had up front, he would put Kuechly on the line and Thomas Davis on the line and Shaq Thompson on the line and Kurt Coleman on the line and make you think like, okay, like, are they going to blitz? And they would blitz, or they'd show 7 at the line and they would just drop out into cover 2 or cover 3 or drop out into 2-man, or they'd run a simulated pressure off that. So I think ideally any defense wants to just be a 4-down rush team. And that way you can always have 7 in coverage and play whatever the hell you want, any cover 2 any split field safety look, any 2-high look, any single high safety look. But to your point, yeah, I think you will see more blitzes, traditional blitzes from McDermott, more like 5- and 6-man rushes, but I think you'll see a lot more simulateds and a lot more versatility from a front usage standpoint than you did with Leslie Frazier, who, to your point, and like I mentioned earlier, was just much more static, like 4 down, your 2 ends, a 1-tech and a 3-tech. Boom, that's where we're going to be over and over again. 1 gap penetration, try and get upfield, yada, 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 all that type of stuff. Oh, I love this answer from John. I know a lot of people like to throw detailed explanations as to why we lost at the end of the season, but mine is simple. When nothing else is working, you have to be able to run the ball. I'm a huge proponent of being able to run the ball, even in today's NFL. I don't care how good your passing attack is. You need some semblance of a run game, and the bigger, not even galaxy brain, but the bigger pendulum piece, again, defenses swung the pendulum in their favor with these 2-high coverages and defensive fronts, and paired with coverages with the idea of stopping zone runs, specifically like outside and wide zone runs, right? Defenses, because they started to build themselves that way, they have inherently become vulnerable to downhill runs, at you type runs, especially gap runs, but it could be inside. So anything with vertical displacement or downhill, it could be duo, could be inside zone. But give me some pin and pull, give me some bash, give me gap scheme pieces where you're people moving. Defenses have become vulnerable to the run because of how they've trended the past several years in order to combat the pass. And again, it's just simple. Offenses become pass heavy. Defenses build themselves to stop the pass. So how do offenses counter? They start to run the ball. Defenses go, we got to stop the run. They build their defense to stop the run. Offenses build their offense to stop the pass. Defenses, so on and so forth, and round we go. Like, these concepts that are, prevalent in the NFL now, they're not new. It's the whole time as a flat circle, true detective, Rustin Cole piece. Like, running the ball will always be important. It will always matter. And I'm going to continue to say that whether you have a diverse offense and run game mixed with your pass game, like the Philadelphia Eagles with Jalen Hurts, or like the Ravens do with Lamar Jackson, or if it's more traditional like the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes last year, where when they needed to, they would just lean into the run game with Isaiah Pacheco and just run downhill, physical, speed, violence, people move. The run game is always going to be important. I like it. Billy says, wrap or any rotation that works for the moment. And we also have good rotation across the board. That's fair. What else? Oh, Rick says this is leaving me really pumped for the season. Go Bills. Yeah, it's a good piece. What else? Yeah. So I think from a large scale perspective, again, like that's what we need to see from this Bills defense. I didn't want it to be too negative in this episode. The Bills defense, again, they have a strong foundation. They are a good defense. If they come out right now and don't change a thing, they're still going to be a really good defense this year. Like, that's what they're going to be. Are they going to struggle at times? Yep. Are we going to be worried about what's going to happen come playoff time? Yep. But they're still going to be a really good defense. They're going to be a top 10, top 5 DVOA type unit just with the roster they have. And even if they employ the same type of philosophy and identity that they have these past several years, the issue has been when you play the big boys, when you get it into the playoffs where matchups mean everything and game plans mean everything, do you have enough variability and fluidity to be whoever you need to be that week in order to get the W? Whatever you need to do, whether it's changing your fronts a bit, whether it's blitzing a bit more, whether it's more simulators, whether it's more man coverage, whether it's more cover two, whether it's more match coverage, anything, whatever dial you need to turn to win a game, do you have the ability to turn that dial? Or are you sitting looking at the button that you want to press and the light's not on and you're pressing that button, but you know it doesn't work and you're like, crap, well, that button's out. What other button can we press? What other dial can we turn? Because the one we need to lean into, the one button we need to press or the one dial we need to have, we don't have for this game. And again, from the bigger perspective, it's harder nowadays to have a cure-all answer for everything. It's hard to just be like, yep, we're a cover 2 defense. That's who we are. It'll be great. We're going to be fine. It's not easy to live that way, especially with how offenses, what the run game can be now and how separate and diverse it is in conjunction with or in juxtaposition with the passing games and what route concepts and distributions look like. And then you start to get, again, into alignments and personnel packages and play action and all these pieces that offenses can do. You need to be able to have that versatility and that variability on defense to be able to combat all of that. Like I showed in the graphic in the beginning of this episode, the Bills have the diversity in coverage from a usage standpoint and an application standpoint to be able to live in 2 high worlds and single high worlds, man and zone, to be able to play cover 4 and cover 2 and Tampa 2 and cover 3 and cover 1 and be able to transition in and out of them seamlessly and make them look like one another and not tip your hand is a tremendously important piece for this Bills defense. That will continue. They just need to add a couple more of those wrinkles and sprinkle in some of the tweaks that we've talked about throughout this episode. Again, mainly from a front perspective, more diversity in their fronts and some more blitzes. Again, not changing the mold. If you're a 25% blitz team, you don't have to become a 45 or 50% blitz team. But, overall, maybe you're 25%, but certain weeks you ratchet it up to 37, 38, based on what your opponent is. Again, not relying so much on, oh, this is who we are, try and beat us type of defense, leaning more into we're going to be whoever we need to be. We're going to be whoever we need to be this week in order to beat you. Again, rock, paper, scissors, that whole philosophy. This week we need to throw rock to win. Can we throw it? Yep. Next week we have to throw paper to win. Can we throw it? Yep. Next week after that, we have to be able to throw scissors. Can we throw it? That's how you got to look at it. Can you throw all 3 consistently and with regularity? That's what the good teams do. Or, the teams that win just throw an amazing rock and they can throw it no matter what. And even when you throw paper, the rock can bust through paper. But that's hard and that's rare. And that's not something you can consistently expect from one side of the ball or the other, offensively or defensively. It's hard to live in that world. Speaking of worlds that we live in a world, if you live in Buffalo, New York, where you have access to the best pizza in Buffalo, New York, and that pizza is One Pie Pizza. The online menu can be found in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or any one of the podcasting apps or platforms that you choose to listen to this show on. Delicious sweet sauce pie, cup and char pepperoni, a great cheese to sauce ratio. They make their own homemade blue cheese. They have a bunch of specialty pies, or you can just go with, a general cheese and pepperoni pizza. When you get like different toppings and pieces, they chop it all up and sprinkle it evenly, so you get like an even bite of all the toppings. Like, it truly is the best in Buffalo for me, which is why I partnered with them. I'm not saying what I'm saying because they sponsor the show. They sponsor the show because I thought their pizza was the best. I tried their pizza before I agreed to have them sponsor the show. And again, like I say every week, they're really good people. They do a lot for the community. They do a lot for the city, a lot of different drives and initiatives throughout the entire year in order to support those in need in the city and community as a whole. So do your taste buds some good. Do the city and the community some good. Get yourself some One Pie Pizza. Again, online menu can be found in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or any one of the podcasting apps or platforms you choose to listen to this show on. Now I'm going to throw up the banner that says Toodles, folks. Before any of you start to leave, if you haven't already, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video if you have not already. Like I mentioned earlier, likes are the lifebloods. I'm falling apart. It happens at the end of every show. I haven't drank water, dehydrated, falling apart. Likes are the lifeblood of live streams. I said it. They affect the algorithm significantly and push the show and the channel towards like the top of the pages and help us to trend for the categories that we are in. So please, and thank you. If you have not dropped a like on this video here on YouTube, whether you're here live or watching post live, please drop a like on this video now. It goes a long way, please, and thank you. If you are listening on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, that's cool as well. Thank you very much for your audio listen and or download. Please rate and review whether you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Drop a star rating, drop an actual review with actual feedback and comments if you like. I love feedback, positive or negative or constructive. I appreciate whatever form it comes in. So please rate and review whether you're listening on one of the audio platforms or here on YouTube. As always, please subscribe to Disguise Coverage. Please, and thank you. That helps a long way, especially on the audio platforms where I know a lot of you listen, but then we had some issues with the Cover One channel and the show is kind of being segmented or separated from it. So please subscribe to the Disguise Coverage channel if you would be so kind on the podcasting apps or platforms. Thank you very much to everyone who tuned in live for this episode of Disguise Coverage. I greatly appreciate you folks. Like I say every time I do a solo show. Last week I wasn't solo. Next week I won't be solo either. Special guest next week. We'll see what comes of that. But anytime I do these solo episodes, it's nice to have a lot of people in the chat and the back and forth and see the questions for myself and the comments to each other and just to watch the ticker scrolling. Because it makes me feel like I'm not alone. It's almost like I have, however many co-hosts that are riding live. So thank you very much to everyone who joined me live on this show. I greatly appreciate you folks in this episode. If you did not join me live and you are watching post live or listening on any one of the podcasting apps or platforms, thank you very much for your post live view, download, listen, whatever have you. Whatever form or fashion your support comes in for myself and this show, I'm tremendously grateful for and tremendously appreciative of. So thank you very much to everyone. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about how awesome this show is. Make them watch it. If you thought this show was terrible, you need to be better as a person, but maybe tell your enemies about this show and try and ruin their day with this show. I will see you next Tuesday, 9 Eastern, for another episode of Disguised Coverage here again, Tuesday, live, 9 p.m. Eastern. If you are watching right now on Tuesday, July 11th, or during the day, Wednesday, July 12th, feel free to tune into the Cover One Film Room Wednesday, July 12th, live at 7 p.m. Eastern with myself and Eric Turner, where we will be joined by Daquan Jones from the Buffalo Bills. We had him on in season last year. He'll be coming back for the film room this week, which is pretty awesome. So feel free to check that out. Check out the previous episodes we've done the past couple of weeks with Greg Rousseau and Kyrie Elam. It's always sweet to have these Bills players jump into the film room with us and break down tape and go over scheme and structure and all that stuff. But until next week on Disguise Coverage, or until tomorrow night on the film room, this has been another episode of Disguise Coverage. I appreciate you folks more than you will possibly know. Thank you for all the kind words and nice things coming up in the chat about myself throughout the episode and now as well. I appreciate you folks. I don't want to bring it up because I think it's corny, but I see it and I appreciate it. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I will see you next Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern, for another episode of Disguise Coverage. Until then, I'm Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at @pro__ant. Godspeed. And as always, go Bills.